I want to ask you something before I say anything else today, and I want you to be honest with yourself as you consider it, because the answer you give, even if you give it only in the silence of your own heart, may be the most important thing that happens to you today. How much of your energy right now, in this season of your life, is being spent trying to make something happen that is not happening? How much of your prayer time has quietly shifted from genuine conversation with God into a kind of desperate management of outcomes you are afraid to release? How many doors have you been pushing on, leaning against, knocking on with the full weight of your determination, your strategy, your carefully laid plans, your sleepless nights of problem solving, only to find that the door has not moved, and that the pushing has left you more exhausted, more discouraged, and more confused than when you first began? I am not asking these questions to wound you. I am asking them because I believe, with everything that more than half a century of faith and ministry has taught me, that the answers to those questions contain the key to the very breakthrough you have been working so hard to produce on your own. There is a season I went through in the early years of my ministry that I do not speak about often, not because I am ashamed of it, but because it is difficult to describe in a way that does justice to how completely I had misunderstood what God was asking of me in that time. I was young, I was full of vision, I was absolutely convinced of the calling of my life, and I was working with an intensity that, looking back, I can only describe as a kind of spiritual violence, not against anyone else, but against the natural pace at which God was choosing to move. I had a picture in my mind of what my ministry should look like, a picture I had prayed over and believed for, and I was determined to bring that picture into reality through the sheer force of my own effort, my own planning, my own relentless forward movement. I scheduled meetings with people who were not ready to meet with me. I pushed open doors that were not yet meant to be open. I applied pressure to situations that needed time rather than pressure. The way a hand pressed too hard against a seedling does not help it grow faster, but simply damages the root system that would eventually have produced something extraordinary. And in the middle of all that forcing, all that striving, all that determined, well-intentioned, faithfully motivated pushing, something happened that I did not expect. I began to lose peace. Not faith, not conviction, not even the sense of calling, but the deep, settled, inexplicable peace that the Apostle Paul described as passing all understanding. That peace began to thin, and what replaced it was a kind of constant low-level anxiety that I tried to mask with more activity. If I could just get this next meeting, if I could just make this next connection, if I could just find the right strategy, the peace would return. But it did not return through more effort. It returned only when I finally, exhausted and humbled and out of ideas, stopped. And in the stopping I heard something I had been too busy pushing to hear. I heard God say quietly, without accusation, simply and clearly, I never asked you to open that door. I asked you to be faithful inside the room you are already in. That moment changed the entire trajectory of my ministry, and it changed the way I understood the relationship between human effort and divine timing, between the doors we force and the doors God opens. And what I learned in that moment is what I want to give you today, because I believe many of you are in the middle of the same exhaustion I was in. The exhaustion that comes not from doing the wrong things, but from trying to do the right things at the wrong pace, in the wrong order, in a season that was calling for something entirely different from what you were offering it. The first thing I want you to understand about forced doors is that forcing is not the same as faith. I want to say that again, because it is perhaps the most important distinction in everything I am going to share with you today. Forcing is not the same as faith. Faith is the confident expectation of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is an interior posture, a settled conviction, a rest in the character and the promises of God. Forcing is something else entirely. Forcing is the decision usually made out of fear disguised as determination, to take over the timing and the mechanism of what God has promised, because we have decided, consciously or not, that God is moving too slowly, or that He needs our help to get the thing done, or that if we do not push this door open ourselves, it may never open at all. Forcing is faith that has curdled into control. And while the outward appearance of forcing can look remarkably similar to faith, the interior experience of it is completely different. Faith produces peace even in uncertainty. Forcing produces anxiety even in activity. I think of a man I knew years ago, a man of genuine faith and genuine gifts, who had been promised by God. In a moment of prayer, he could describe with absolute clarity that he would one day lead an organization that would touch thousands of lives. He had received that promise and he had believed it, and then he had begun almost immediately the work of making it happen. He cultivated relationships strategically. He positioned himself carefully. He took on roles that gave him visibility with the people he believed would open the right doors for him. And for several years he moved forward with the efficiency of a man who was absolutely certain he was following God's direction. But underneath the efficiency, I watched something slowly eroding. The joy that had been in him when he first received that promise began to give way to a kind of calculation that had very little joy in it at all. The relationships he was cultivating began to feel to him like assets rather than people. The roles he was taking on began to feel like steps on a ladder rather than genuine callings. He came to me one evening and said something I have never forgotten. He said, "I feel like I am building something, but I am not sure anymore that I am building it with God. I am not sure He is in this the way He was in the beginning." What that man had experienced without realizing it was the moment when legitimate faith had crossed the invisible line into something that was entirely his own project. God had given him a promise. God had not given him the strategy. God had not given him the timetable. God had not asked him to engineer the outcome. He had taken a genuine word from God and surrounded it with so many of his own plans and mechanisms that the original word had become almost unrecognizable under the weight of his own effort. And when I asked him in that conversation to tell me the last time he had sat with a promise, simply as a promise, without also planning his next move toward it, he was quiet for a long time before he admitted that he could not remember. I want to ask you the same question right now, and again I want you to be honest with yourself in the answering of it. When did you last sit with what God has promised you simply as a promise, without simultaneously planning your next move toward making it happen? When did you last release the specific outcome you have been carrying and say to God, not with resignation, not with defeat, but with genuine trust, "This is yours, and I am going to stop treating it as mine to manage"? When did you last choose to be faithful in the room you are already in, rather than pouring your energy into forcing open the door to the next one? The second thing I want you to understand about forced doors is that a door you force open yourself is not the same as a door God opens for you, even if they lead to the same place. And this is where what I am sharing today gets genuinely uncomfortable, because it challenges something that most of us believe is a virtue. We believe that persistence, that determination, that the refusal to give up is always a sign of faith. And sometimes it is. The widow before the unjust judge did not give up, and her persistence was honored. The friend who knocked at midnight did not give up, and his persistence was honored. But there is a difference between persistent prayer and persistent forcing, and that difference is entirely about where the effort is directed. Persistent prayer keeps the effort directed at God. Persistent forcing keeps the effort directed at the outcome. And the shift from one to the other, which can happen so gradually we barely notice it, changes everything about what we are actually doing and what we are actually building. A door you force open yourself places you inside a room that was not yet prepared for your arrival. The people in that room were not yet ready for what you carry. The resources in that room were not yet aligned with what you need. The timing of your presence in that room is off in ways that may be subtle at first, but that will compound over time into something you will eventually have to spend enormous energy correcting. I have seen this happen to people of genuine faith more times than I can count. and it always follows the same pattern. The forced door opens, the person steps through, exhausted but relieved, convinced that the struggle is finally over. And then slowly they discover that the room on the other side of that door is not what they expected, that the blessing they worked so hard to access carries complications they did not anticipate, that the position they maneuvered themselves into requires a version of them that is not yet fully formed, that the relationship they pursued so aggressively carries a weight that the relationship itself cannot yet sustain. The door was real, the promise behind it was real, but the timing was wrong, and the method was wrong, and the consequence is a version of the right thing arriving before either the person or the circumstances were ready for it. A door God opens, on the other hand, opens from the other side. It opens before you have figured out how to open it. It opens in ways that you could not have engineered, through people you did not know to contact, through circumstances you did not arrange, through a sequence of events that, when you look back on it, carries the unmistakable signature of a hand that was working long before you knew the door existed. And when you walk through a door that God has opened, you walk through it with your strength intact rather than depleted, because you were not the one who opened it. You walk through it with peace rather than anxiety, because the room on the other side was prepared for you before you arrived. You walk through it with gratitude rather than relief, because you know beyond any doubt that what you are walking into was not something you produced, but something you received. I think of a woman in our congregation who had been praying for years for a particular opportunity in her professional life, an opportunity that she was absolutely qualified for, that she had every reason to believe was in her future, and that she had spent years actively pursuing through every legitimate channel available to her. She had made connections. She had built her resume. She had positioned herself carefully and patiently and faithfully. And every door she knocked on remained closed. Not rudely closed. Not permanently closed as far as she could tell. Just closed, quietly, without explanation again and again. She came to me once during those years, not in despair but in genuine bewilderment, and asked me a question I thought was one of the most honest I had ever been asked. She said, "How do I know whether what I am doing is persistent faith or just stubborn control?" I told her that the answer to that question was usually found not in the activity itself, but in the interior condition that accompanied it. If the pursuit was producing peace, even in the uncertainty, it was likely faith. If the pursuit was producing a low-level anxiety that only went away when she felt she had taken the next right step toward the outcome, it was likely control dressed in the clothing of faith. She sat with that answer for several weeks, and then she came back and told me she had made a decision. She was going to stop pursuing the specific opportunity she had been chasing and simply be excellent in the role she was currently in, trusting that if the larger door was meant to open, God knew where she was and did not need her to keep standing in front of it knocking. She said it felt at first like giving up, but within a few days, she said, it began to feel like something entirely different. It began to feel like rest. And within 6 months of that decision, without any effort or strategy or positioning on her part, the opportunity she had been pursuing for years came to her, offered by someone she had never met, through a sequence of events she could not have arranged in a decade of deliberate effort. She walked through that door having done nothing to open it except to stop trying to open it herself, and to trust the one whose job it had always been. The third thing I want to give you today is perhaps the most practical, and it is this. Learning to stop forcing does not mean learning to do nothing. It means learning to redirect your effort from the door to the room you are already in. And this is the part that most people miss when they hear a message like this one, because it can be mistaken for passivity, for the idea that faith means sitting still and waiting for God to do everything, while we contribute nothing. That is not what I am saying, and it is not what Scripture teaches. What Scripture teaches and what the testimony of every person I have ever watched walk through a God-opened door confirms is that the preparation for the next room happens in the current room, and that the person who is faithful in the current room, fully invested in what is in front of them rather than constantly straining toward what is not yet available to them, is always better prepared for the next door when it opens than the person who spent the same period of time pushing on the door rather than developing in the room. Joseph is the great biblical example of this, and I return to him today because I believe his story speaks directly to what I am trying to give you. Joseph was given a dream, a promise from God of significant elevation and influence, and then almost immediately his life moved in what appeared to be exactly the opposite direction. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was falsely accused by his employer's wife. He was imprisoned without cause or recourse. And at every stage of that painful, unjust, drawn-out process, what we see in the biblical account is not a man straining against his circumstances, trying to force his way out, trying to engineer his own release, trying to position himself strategically for the fulfillment of his dream. What we see is a man being faithful in each room he finds himself in, regardless of how far that room seems from the promise he is carrying. In Potiphar's house, he was so faithful and so excellent that he was put in charge of everything. In the prison, he was so faithful and so excellent that the warden put him in charge of all the other prisoners. Joseph was not passive, he was extraordinarily active, but his activity was directed at the room he was in, not at the door he was trying to get through. And when the door finally opened, it opened in a single day through a single conversation, through a sequence of events so precisely orchestrated that no human being could have arranged them. The door opened from the other side, and Joseph walked through it not as an exhausted man who had finally forced his way through, but as a man who had been prepared in every room he had ever been in for exactly what waited for him on the other side. I want to speak now to the specific situations I believe many of you are carrying today, because this message only fulfills its purpose if it reaches into the actual places where you are living right now. If you are the person who has been forcing a door in your career or your professional life, working harder and harder to make something happen that is simply not moving, I want you to hear this. The energy you are spending on that door is energy that is not going into the room you are already in. And the room you are already in is the preparation ground for everything that comes next. The most dangerous thing about forcing a door is not that it fails to open. It is that the effort of forcing it distracts you from the excellence that would make you ready for the room on the other side. Stop pushing on the door. Invest everything you have in where you are right now. Trust that the God who gave you the vision of what is possible also knows where you are standing and has a plan for getting you there that does not require your management. If you are the person who has been forcing a door in a relationship, pursuing a connection that seems resistant, pressing against a dynamic that will not shift despite your best efforts, I want you to hear this. A relationship that requires that level of effort to initiate or to maintain is usually telling you something important about its timing, or its health, or its readiness for what you are trying to bring to it. God's doors in relationships open with a naturalness, a sense of rightness, a mutual recognition that does not need to be engineered or sustained by one person's disproportionate effort. Release the forcing, pray for the relationship. Be faithful and excellent and present in the relationships you already have. And trust that the connections God intends for you will find you without requiring you to hold them open by hand. If you are the person who has been forcing a door in your faith itself, straining to manufacture a sense of God's presence or a certainty of God's direction that is simply not coming through the methods you have been applying, I want you to hear this most carefully of all. Sometimes the effort to feel God more intensely is itself the thing standing between you and the experience of His presence. Because the effort to feel is a form of control, and God's presence is not something we produce. It is something we receive. In the stillness, in the stopping, in the moment when we finally release the straining and simply sit before Him without an agenda, without a list of what we need Him to do, without the pressure of what we need to feel. Elijah heard the still small voice not during the wind, not during the earthquake, not during the fire, but in the quiet that came after all of those things had passed. The voice was always there. The noise of the forcing was simply too loud to hear it. I want you to say something with me now, and I want you to say it as an act of deliberate release, because I believe that what some of you need today is not more information but a decision, a moment in which you choose consciously to put down what you have been carrying and trust the hands that were always meant to carry it. Say, I release the door I have been forcing. Say, I trust God to open what He has promised from the other side. Say, I will be faithful and excellent in the room I am already in. Say, the preparation happening in my current season is not wasted time, it is essential work. Say, I will stop measuring God's faithfulness by the speed at which the next door opens. Say, I choose peace over striving, trust over control, faithfulness over forcing. Say, God's timing is better than my timing, and I will stop pretending otherwise. Say, the door that is meant for me cannot be taken from me, and the door that is closed to me right now is closed for a reason I will one day understand. Say, I am not giving up. I am growing up into the person who will be ready to walk through the right door when God opens it. And say this final declaration with everything in you. Say, I trust you, God, with the door, and I will give you everything I have in the room where I am standing right now. Father, I come before you today on behalf of everyone hearing this message, everyone who is tired from forcing, everyone whose hands ache from the pushing, everyone whose peace has been consumed by the effort to make something happen that you have asked them simply to believe for and to wait for. I ask that you would meet each person in this moment with a grace so tangible and so specific that they feel in their body the permission to stop straining. I ask that you would restore to each of them the peace that passes understanding, the peace that is not dependent on the door opening but on the character of the one who holds the key. I ask that you would redirect their energy from the closed door to the open room, from what is not yet available to them toward what is already in front of them and waiting for their full investment. For the one who has been forcing a door in their career, show them today one specific thing they can do with excellence in the room they are already in. Let that act of faithfulness be the beginning of a momentum that you, not they, will carry forward to the next door. For the one who has been forcing a door in a relationship, bring a peace to their heart about the timing of that connection, and let them release the pressure that has been making the very thing they want more difficult to receive. For the one who has been forcing the door in their faith, let this be the moment of stopping. Let the quiet that follows this prayer be not empty but full of your presence, full of the still, small voice that has been speaking the whole time, waiting for the noise of the straining to subside enough to be heard. Because the next door God is preparing to open in your life may be closer than you think, and I want to make sure you are standing in the right place when it opens. Leave a comment below and tell me what is the door you are going to stop forcing today, because I believe your honesty might be the very thing that gives someone else the courage to put down what they have been carrying. Faith rising, rise every day in faith.